Hey book community. So today I wanted to do a video on some of my favorite indie reads of 2024. Now, I read I think 17 indie books in all in 2024, and I'm going to look at my top 6 today. Now, why 6? I don't know. It just kind of fell out that way when I was looking over all my indie reads and deciding what my top favorites were of the year. So these are the ones we're going to look at. So let's get started. First of all, and these are in no particular order, these are just my favorites. Quaint Creatures by Andrew D. Meredith. Now this is a cozy fantasy. Maybe it's been longer, maybe I just haven't been paying attention, but it seems like in the last year to 2 years, cozy fantasy has gotten a lot more popular. And of course, there's always been some form of cozy fantasy. The Hobbit was cozy fantasy. It can be cozy fantasy. I've heard it considered that anyway. But this was a self-pub installment of cozy fantasy and very lovable characters, but still characters that had a lot of depth to them as well. You find this ogre, I believe, who owned a pet shop slash veterinarian clinic. And so you follow him and he gets involved in some things and in his town, dealing with someone trying to do bad things. I'm not going to give you much more spoilers than that. But a very interesting, very fun, quick, as you can see, it's very quick. There went my bookmark. Very easy read, but still enjoyable cozy fantasy by Andrew D. Meredith. And this was one of my top reads last year. Next is the second book of a trilogy that I don't know that I know at least 2 of the books came out last year. I don't remember when the first one came out, but I read the first one by an author that I originally met on TikTok, and I enjoyed the first book. I enjoyed it a lot, so much that I couldn't wait to get to the next book. I don't know that I would consider top read, but it was pretty close. I enjoyed it. But then I read this book, Stone and Tide. The first book was Stone and Sky by Z.S. Diamante. The second book was Stone and Tide by Z.S. Diamante, book 2 in his Stone and Sky trilogy. And I often say when I talk about The Faithful and the Fallen, you read book 1 of The Faithful and the Fallen, and it's a good book. It wasn't my favorite of the 4, but it's a good book. You read book 2, it gets better. But then book 3 is it's so much more elevated. That's Ruin. It's so much more elevated than the first 2 books, and then you move on to Wrath, which is amazing as well. For me, that was this book. This book really stepped up its game. The author stepped up his game with this book compared to the first book. The first book was good. The first book was everything it needed to be, but this to me was just so much better. And the third book follows the same suit. So if you haven't tried out that trilogy, I really encourage you to. I don't want to go over the plot because in this trilogy, it's so vast. There is good versus evil. There's that trope. It's heroic fantasy. It seems to be kind of a blend of the Lord of the Rings and D&D style fantasy, which I love a lot. So anyway, this is a very good book. One of my favorite reads of last year. In fact, this series is going to be an indie series that I'm sure is going to fall close to some of my favorite series of all time. And I look forward to what this author has next because I know he has another book coming down the pike as well. This next book is a series that I started a couple of years ago. It seems like I started maybe towards the end of 2023, maybe halfway through 2023, and continued to read it until I finished the last book that's been published in the beginning of 2024. And this definitely is some of my favorite things going on in fantasy right now by Ryan Cahill. It is The Bound and the Broken, but specifically of War and Ruin. Now, his final book, which the name eludes me at this time, is coming out sometime later this year, maybe in the first quarter of the year, I can't remember. But this is the last book that he had published, and I was late to the game. I think all of these books were already out by the time I actually started reading the series. Maybe this one had just come out. And again, each book got better. I enjoyed the first book I can't remember the title of the first one right now. But in that, it was very traditional fantasy. It felt like a little bit of the Wheel of Time. It felt like a little bit of traditional dragon riding fantasy. It felt like a little bit of the Lord of the Rings with a modern twist, a modern flair to it. But by book 2, he really come into his own and writing his own story. Of course, he's influenced by a lot of other writers and a lot of other books, but still he's coming into his own. And by this book, this was absolutely one of my top books of last year, whether indie or traditional or whatever. But so this video is just about indies. But War and Ruin, and it is just epic in every sense of the word. Characters that are fleshed out in the best of ways. Triumph, tragedy, everything you could want from a fantasy book. There is some more adult language in it than you would find in The Lord of the Rings or other things like that, but still all around a great fantasy. I have some of my friends, we talk about book community friends. Well, some of my friends that aren't in the book community that are my actual friends have been reading this, and I'm thankful to be able to talk to them about it. It is such great fantasy. The next is kind of, now there is a lot of debate on what, I think I mentioned this in a former video, of what is the difference in sci-fi and fantasy. And some have come along the way and have started talking about sci-fantasy. And I know there's debate on whether that's a good term or not. I like it personally. I do feel like there's some fantasy that feels like real world science that's pushed to its limits and things that possibly could happen. And then there are things that are so stretched, though I enjoy it, it feels like fantasy. I would put Star Wars in sci-fantasy. I would put this book in sci-fantasy. And it is Down Below Beyond by T.A. Bruno. Now, I came into this, I had bought this a while before I ever read it, and I didn't know what to expect. As some of the books that I have, I know nobody else has problems with buying books and then taking a while to get to them, but it did take me a while to get to this one. And finally, when I got to it, I was sucked into the story. It was fun. It was everything that the things that I love about classic Star Wars. Not going to really mention modern Disney Star Wars, but everything I loved about classic Star Wars mixed with a flair of Guardians of the Galaxy. That's kind of what I said. If you took Guardians of the Galaxy and put it together with old school Star Wars, I feel like you have a pretty close vibe for what this book was. And actually, I made a mistake in a very earlier book video about a year ago. I thought he was underwater, so I thought this had something to do with being underwater. It looks like he's rising to the top of water, but he's not. Anyway, don't know why I said that, but it's a very good book, very fun book. Space travel, not really time jumping as much as jumping from reality to reality, things of that nature. It was so much fun. So please try T.A. Bruno's Down Below Beyond. The next book is actually a book that I was privileged to be able to help judge in this year's Spiff Box, and with that I was able to be on Team Philip Chase. And one of the books that I was assigned, the book that I ended up picking to send on to him to read over, was Trollgrave by Alex S. Bradshaw. And again, I didn't know what to expect. I knew by the look of the book. I knew looking at this book that it would be fun. I didn't know everything I was getting into. This is it seems like a Norse Viking inspired. A lot of the religious practices you see are drawn from that. The world building is drawn from Norse. And I started reading John Gwynne this past year. And so a lot of those vibes I felt in this book. And so I was already vibing with that, with John Gwynne and some other things as well. And this went right along with it. And it just, spoke to me. It fit, it worked for me. This did. So this follows a mage, a healer, kind of both of those things together. He would go from town to town, spreading the message of his gods as well as helping people. And he really kind of it studies, it looks into how you view other people and what they believe, how you view other people and what they feel about things. And the kind of your differences in people, overcoming differences, overcoming certain prejudices, as you'll see in this book. It really hits on that a lot, and I think it was a very good entry, and I enjoyed it very much. Alex S. Bradshaw, Trollgrave. It's standalone, but it's also a part of his A Windborn Saga. There was actually a book before this that was also a standalone. This is the only one I've read so far, but I do want to pick up the other one and read it as well. But I do encourage you to pick that up. One of my favorite reads. The last book I have here, and you probably can already see in the video, is The Black Crown by John A. Douglas. I don't know if you follow John A. Douglas on social media. John is a colorful character. Sometimes some of his posts can be a little rough around the edges, but that's okay. He was gracious enough to send me this book, and I don't think it was terribly long before I read it, but I didn't read it right away. Of course, I tried to put it in somewhat of a rotation of when I would get to it. And then again, when I started reading this book, it just hit all the right notes. I put a post up on X, Twitter, here a little while back that talked about my love for D&D style fantasy. Even though I've never played the game D&D, don't have a lot of experience with that at all, I love the story type. I'm reading the Drist books right now, and it just, every one of those books I love. This reminds me a lot of that. It is heavily influenced by that type of fantasy, and so I was all in for it. And you follow this young orc, I think maybe half orc, and you follow him and his journey of growth. It's a coming of age, I would say, mixed with a hero's journey, mixed with just becoming the person or the orc you need to be, found family, discovering things about your family that you didn't know. Maybe you had the wrong impression and things get better. Anyway, just very good, very well written, very good fantasy. And again, I encourage you to pick this up. I've enjoyed so many books, but these were at the top of my list of the ones I enjoyed the most last year. So what are some of your favorite fantasy books of 2024? I've already read, I think, 4 indie fantasy books this year. I think I'm on my 5th right now. I have to go back and look, but I think I'm on my 5th right now. And I feel like this is going to be an even better year of reading not only fantasy, but indie fantasy. Thank you for listening, and till next time, go read books.